Well, let's talk to Aubrey Allegretti, Chief Political Correspondent for The Times. Aubrey, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Let's kick off a bit with that, actually, if you don't mind. We'll talk about migrants and prisoners and all sorts of things in a minute. But the price cap going up is a bit of a double blow, isn't it, to pensioners who've already had their winter fuel allowance taken off them. A lot of them being very concerned this morning, telling me that, you know, they're really now worried about the winter approaching. And we've just had Angela Knight on, the former head of UK Energy, who says it'll probably go up again before the end of the year.
It certainly is going to be quite a difficult winter for pensioners. And I think the problem that Labour's made for itself here is that it's probably going to have to own this decision very, very strongly. They're going to have to own the criticism of how much sort of hardship those 10 million pensioners who won't get this benefit anymore because it's being means tested and no longer universal will face this winter because of Rachel Reeves's decision. Now, she argues, obviously, that there was an economic black hole of around £22 billion when she came into office that she needed to plug. But ultimately, this was her decision. Labour is going to have to start learning that it is going to make difficult decisions and that it will have to carry the can for decisions Rachel Reeves makes. I think we're expecting there could even be sort of more bad news stored up in the budget on the 30th of October, which is around the time I think the price cap sort of comes into effect. So actually, I think people will be worried about not just this, but what might happen, further announcements in October as well.
Yeah, I mean, that is the problem. I mean, the sort of the Ides are conspiring against the government, if you like. You know, there's nothing really good news-wise for them, is there, coming down the pipe? You know, we've got, you know, energy prices increasing. We've got the migrant figures that came out yesterday not looking as though anything's changed. I know they don't really involve the government because it's only up to June of last year, but we've still got more and more people coming over on the small boats. We've got NICE also yesterday declaring that they wouldn't make this new Alzheimer's drug available on the NHS, not directly a government decision, but still something that people will look to the government and say, well, why can't we get this this drug that everybody else should be able to get for free? You know, the crime rates are still going up. There's terrible things happening all over the country in terms of people being murdered, people being stabbed. You know, there's no good news out there for Keir Starmer, it seems to me.
Well, the inheritance is really difficult. I suspect what the government would be most keen to point to is the fact that it resolved some of the strikes with junior doctors and some train drivers, and that it hopes that by sort of unblocking most of those issues, although not all, certainly, that that's going to pave the way for less anemic growth, that people will actually be able to sort of catch their train on time, be able to see a junior doctor. And so the sort of issues...
Except even that's backfired, though, because we've seen Louise Hay saying basically that, you know, every strike that we're going to solve is better to solve than to allow to go ahead because it's going to cost too much money to let them strike. So every union now is coming there cap in hand. We know that ASLEF, having already signed the deal for 15%, are going to go on strike from now until Christmas anyway on the LNER line.
Yeah, although over slightly different things, so it's not over.
Yeah, but the public don't care why the train isn't running. They just know it's not running.
Sure, but I mean, you know, it's a political argument to make that the two are linked, that the unions are now striking because of this pay deal. That's not sort of factually...
Well, no, but they're striking despite the pay deal, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, over something different.
Right.
And so,
but junior doctors are also threatening to strike again next year. They've already come, BMA have already said that. We've got GPs wanting to get more money, but they're already working to rule. We've got the RMT now going in to visit the Treasury to try and get their chunk of pound of flesh. You know, I mean, the fact that they've solved the strikes isn't really the point. The fact is they've kind of opened the floodgates to the unions now taking over. And there's a piece in the Telegraph this morning saying unions are now pushing to repeal the anti-strike laws.
Yeah, I guess the rail unions would argue that just because you accept a pay offer and end strikes over paying conditions doesn't mean you should be able to not withdraw your labour for other industrial disputes like, you know, bad management. But that aside, there are obviously a list of problems, and the government is having to play almost whack-a-mole, if you like.
Yes.
So I suspect that they will find that just because they've made these moves to settle the pay disputes with ASLEF and the junior doctors, actually there are going to be lots of issues coming down the line. And yeah, as you said, potential further industrial action as well. So
well, that was kind of my point. You know, it's not an anti-government rant I'm going on. I'm just saying that there's nothing good out there for them, and even the things that you might have said were good, i.e. that they've stopped the strike from ASLEF's point, that even that is kind of tainted in its own way.
Yeah, tainted is probably the right word, and I think we'll see it all come to a head probably in the next month when you see the TUC conference, the Trades Union conference, and Labour conference in Liverpool. There's certainly some on the left who are sort of keen to use that as a moment to show Labour their strength. I think they're particularly unhappy about Labour's watering down, or alleged watering down, of the New Deal, i.e. the workers' rights package that Angela Rayner had promised. So we're likely to see a lot of chest beating and tub thumping from the unions as they try to show their strength.
Yeah, and I mean the FT I think had a piece yesterday saying that the TUC will present at the union, a TUC conference, a kind of a menu of demands really, which will include the fact that they haven't really had above inflation pay rises as a general rule for quite a few years. So they're going to be demanding yet more money from the government.
Absolutely, yes, and I think they realise that the government's in its kind of honeymoon period, and so they're sort of determined to get as many requests in as possible. They're looking for pay restoration back to 2011 levels, I think it was. The current chair of the TUC, who's actually the leader of the Fire Brigades Union, he was saying that since 2011, I think it's been about, they haven't had pay increases worth about 1.5% real terms a year. So they're looking for pay restoration, which I think economists estimate could cost up to £50 billion. Now, I don't think anyone imagines that ministers are going to do that, but it does speak to the pressure that they're going to come under from the unions. We'll just have to see, you know, when we get to the spending review next spring, just how much money the government sets aside for.
And there's a kind of mixed messaging problem, I think, going on as well with the government, because on the one hand, you've got Rachel Reeves saying there's this big black hole, we didn't expect it to be there. Everyone else is saying, well, yeah, but you did kind of know about it, because here's Keir Starmer back in April talking about a £24 billion black hole, asking the government if they were going to disgracefully take away the winter fuel benefit, which they've now done. And on the other hand, you've still got the net zero commitments being pushed through. I mean, we had Annalise Dodds yesterday over in Sudan finding hundreds of millions of pounds to give to vulnerable people in Sudan. We had Ed Miliband over in Brazil, having flown there to talk to some people about climate change. You know, they're spending quite a lot of money on public sector pay rises. So they can't really have it both ways. You can't say there's no money for this, but there's loads of money for that.
That is absolutely right. I mean, there are trade-offs and there are choices, and people will make a decision about whether or not they think it's acceptable that the government did settle this, very large monetary value dispute with the unions, and then talked about the fiscal black hole, which is more about the kind of in-year pressures, so that the things that are already coming up. Right. We know as well from figures this week that government debt is incredibly high. It's running at close to 100%. The government's spent more than it's spent proportionate to the budget that it has for the year at this point than any time since 1997. Yeah. So the economic pressures are really, really severe on the government. Yeah, they really are. And just to have a bit more bad news for Keir Starmer, sorry about this, Keir, Labour Party membership has sunk to its lowest level in a decade under Sir Keir Starmer's leadership. That's news this morning. Yeah, it's going to be really difficult for him. And obviously, I suspect he wanted to come into office, first 100 days, really hit the ground running. It's got a little bit quieter over recess. He wasn't probably anticipating the riots that flared up a few weeks ago. So I suspect come September, the government will be keen as quickly as possible to sort of move on with legislation, show that method of delivery. I was speaking to ministers yesterday who were saying, a month is going to pass like that, then it's 2 months, then it's 6, then you're halfway through the parliament. I think they're very conscious that they might only get 5 years in government, and they want to move as quickly as possible. But whether or not they can sort of turn the wheels quickly enough, we'll still have to wait and see. Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating sort of autumn period, isn't it? We'll see how it all plays out. Aubrey Allegretti, thank you very much indeed, Chief Political Correspondent for The Times.